Hello, Jimmy. Hello, Alessandro.
Hello.
Alessandro. Yes.
Alessandro.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Welcome.
I'm Susan. I'm the project maintainer for Ratify, and I'm also an engineer with ACR, Azure Container Registry. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm also in Microsoft. My team, I'm in commercial software engineering. My team is exploring Ratify and is actually contributing as well. So I I was expecting them also to join. We are 4 or 5 engineers, and I watched some recordings in the past. So I was just curious and I wanted to join to see what if I can help or if my team can help.
Oh, that's great to hear. How did you find out about us?
Well, we were exploring all the landscape of secure supply chain, how to sign images, and of course we encountered the most popular project from Six Store to Notation, and so also we of course we heard about the announcement of Ratify framework a few months ago. Plus, I just came back from Valencia, so I've been talking and seeing talks and presentation about all sorts of technology around the general ideas behind secure supply chain. There was a lot of presence from Six Store, of course. Six Store was a huge presence with a lot of engineers. They hire a lot of people, so people that I also know from other companies now work at ChainGuard. So I'm curious myself, and also as my role in Microsoft kind of requires that we stay on top of technology and be proactive in learning and helping open source projects in general, like getting upskilled on anything that our customers want. And the need for secure software supply chain is so big and so important that we cannot just let this thing slip. So I'll be happy, and also I'll relay everything I learn and everything I can learn from this to my team. Yeah, it's a start, but looks like it's something that is really interesting to be part of this journey together.
That's great. This is a pretty new project, so we have some pieces, like, I don't know if you were able to run through the quick start scenarios, but the main components of Red are the referrer store, like where can you pull your artifact from, and the verifiers, like Notation is a built-in verifier, and there's the policy enforcer. Do you have a specific scenario in mind? Is there a verifier that you will use or you want to build?
I'm not sure right now. I mean, I've been using Notation and Cosine, so I didn't touch the part where OPA Gatekeeper checks the images in the cluster. So I need a bit more exploration before I can form some opinion on some contribution in terms of scenarios.
Yeah, no problem. Just let us know if you have any questions. I'm going to check with a couple of folks on my team to see if they're able to attend. So just a few minutes. Like, usually by now they're here already, but maybe there's some meeting that I'm not aware of. So let me quickly check.
It's one question. So I'm based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. So it's rather late for us. Other CNCF, I know Ratify is not a CNCF. It is a CNCF project, right? So it is incubated
Not
already,
yet.
or not yet? Okay. So other projects tend to have a bit more Europe
Early in the morning.
friendly. Yeah, if it's
Got it.
possible and it's not too much of a hassle for everybody involved, I would love to be able to attend and also get some sleep at the end.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah, that makes sense. And probably Jimmy is on the East Coast, so he will probably be happy to move to an earlier time. Is that right, Jimmy? Like, I don't know if you want to eat dinner and listen to us as a background noise.
Yeah, I mean, if it was earlier than 7 o'clock, that would be great. But that's the only meeting that I routinely have on a weekly basis at 7 p.m. Every other day, I'm done by 5 or so. So whatever makes it work, I guess.
Yeah. So Sajay have a very, very packed calendar. I will keep a note of the like timing preference, and I'll probably chat to him and see if we can move it to an earlier time, because I'm pretty flexible. I can do morning meetings as well. Okay. I will see if there's anything. Let me ping Eric.
Can see your screen.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to share the app. Okay, let me stop sharing. Thank you, Teja. Oh, Teja, if we move this time to earlier, like early in the morning, would that work for you, or would that be a problem?
Depends on the time, Susan.
Sure. Just quickly pinging Eric. Oh, okay. Eric is off this week. And I believe Akash is also off. Okay, then I think we can get started. Let me reshare the app. Okay, can everyone see my screen again?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. We don't have a very long agenda today. I had some updates from the dynamic configuration I'm working on. So
Where is that HackMD document? I didn't find the link there.
oh,
To review. Oh, you mean this notes, right? Yeah, okay.
yeah, so this the notes from last week, there's an item called support dynamic configuration, and
Okay.
the title itself links to the design or the proposed changes document. I've just added some more details as I'm going through the implementation, but not much have changed. So Sajay just joined. I just got a message from Eric, so let me quickly check if he has any question. Okay, you are off. No problem. Yeah, so last week I talked about like adding extra methods for reloading the store, reloading the verifier, but I've updated that to a reload everything method, because I realized if we're just reloading one thing at a time, that could have like inconsistencies depending on when the file gets changed. So I now have a method to reload everything, and right at the beginning I will lock the mutex and release the lock after everything is updated. And as Teja was suggesting, to add a file hash to keep track if there's any real changes in the configuration. So I'm proposing to add the hash to the config struct, and that will be computed on configuration load. So then we only read in the file once to get all the objects as well as computing the hash. So it's kind of like putting a stamp on this set of configuration. Does that sound good? Any questions?
You're storing the file hash in the config? You mean in the code?
In this struct.
I see.
Yeah, does that make sense, Teja? And I've put the JSON would you say that's a minus? Like basically it's a C# JSON ignore equivalent.
Okay.
And
So whenever you read the config file, whenever you deserialize it, you get the hash and then you add it as this property value, correct?
yes.
I see.
Yep. And we have some logic in serve.go where we're initializing the executor from the configuration. So I've extracted that into like a configuration manager file. So then that file would be responsible for initializing the executor and also watching the configuration file and update the executor if there's any changes. I'm still working through the testing and like make sure the logs are working as expected. So I don't have a PR yet, but these are the changes that I have so far. Okay, full Sajay. So yeah, Akash and Eric are off today, so it's just me today. And we also have Alessandro joining. Just while I think of it, Alessandro is based in Europe, so this is quite late for him, and he asked if there is if possible in the future, we could hold the meeting in an earlier time.
Yeah, I think you can just create a doodle, like a doodle poll, and then we can maybe get feedback and reschedule. I have no problems with earlier time because this actually collides with another meeting that I have. So I'm happy to reschedule.
Sure. What poll did you say? A doodle poll?
Yeah. And because this calendar is shared by multiple teams, right? We just need to figure out whether the slot is available for this Zoom call and whatnot. That's the other thing. So we can work with Karen, who helped set up this call, and we can create a doodle poll and see who all can attend it, if that helps.
Yeah, cool. Alessandro, he is from a Microsoft team, and he is interested in secure supply chain, and he's exploring, and he is also interested in contributing.
Very cool.
Welcome again. Would you like to add anything, Alessandro?
I'm also a CNCF ambassador. I've been involved in the community for some time. So contributing to Kubernetes, I was part of this team. In general, yes, I work at Microsoft, and I, of course, as my employer, but been doing open source for the longest time, and I always approach everything with the community at instead of just my employer.
That's really cool. So I think that would be very valuable for us in the sense that I mean, Days Labs has been chosen as a place so that we can give this upstream somewhere at some point in time. So this will not be going into Microsoft in any form. And there's a separate team that's going to be working on like add-ons for respective services. And whatever goes into Ratify is hopefully cloud vendor neutral as much as possible. Or if we have implementations, it would be like what we want to do, like through groups and providers.
Of course, you need a sponsor from the TOC to get involved, to get included in the CNCF. But I mean, I would, let's say, support it as much as I can as an ambassador and a community member of CNCF. So count on my support.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up on the agenda. Yeah, I think it's the item that we talked about last week. Jimmy, the gatekeeper audit interval, I see Rita has responded.
Yeah, so I reached out to those folks. I reached out to Will and Rita and Max, and Rita responded and asked me to create an issue. So I opened an issue there in Gatekeeper, and I guess they're waiting to see how many people like it or plus want it. But up until then, I think we really need to two things. One, ensure that we are pulling from the cache unless the cache is invalid, whatever that mechanism is. And then two, as Sajay pointed out, we probably should make the logging such that we know that we're pulling from the cache, because that'll make it easier to troubleshoot later on. But the main issue obviously is that the audits that go on in background for Gatekeeper, they are not configurable at a constraint template or a constraint level, which means they're not configurable at a policy level. They're configurable at the Gatekeeper system level. So what, as I said last week, that means that you're going to continue to see log messages in Ratify saying that Gatekeeper is, testing whether this image, is signed and verified, which the caching should take care of. My biggest concern was I didn't know if it was caching or not. And so my biggest concern was that it was going to go out and make all these calls out to a remote system outside of the Kubernetes cluster, and then you multiply that by how many policies there would be and how many clusters, and it starts to get unmanageable. So I think right now, updating the logging, making sure that the caching is working. I think over time, I still would like to see the ability for Gatekeeper to more granularly control what policies provided background, an audit, and or how that audit can be changed for different intervals. But until then, I think caching and logging is our biggest thing. I have no idea if and when the Gatekeeper community would decide to build this, and I honestly don't know what it would take to change. So I guess the discussion is done for now, other than the caching and logging follow-up.
Yeah, so couple of things to note. The first thing is I went ahead and created an issue that Ratify should cache at the executor level. But I also found that we have an executor class called executor with cache. So Teja, do you have any context on what is our original thinking with the cached executor, and how do we know if the result needs to be refreshed, like if the decision needs to be refreshed?
I think this was the reason we had from beginning. There should be a cache at a higher level. I think that's why that class exists, that file exists. Our original thinking is to start something with simple time-based cache, and that time interval is configurable in the configuration.
I see. Yeah, it sounds reasonable to as a starting point. So is executor with cache on the code path at all, or is it just kind of checked in but not used?
Oh, I'm just looking at the code now. Yeah, I don't know whether it is plugged into the code path when we hook up an executor. We may want to check the code.
Yeah, no problem. Jimmy, does that sound reasonable, having a configurable time-based cache?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was my assumption that was the way we were going to go anyways. That way we can decide on our side, when we're going to invalidate the cache. And it might be not just a time-based, but over time, I think it would be also what event would invalidate the cache, besides just a period of, aging of the artifact. But in any event, I think we definitely need to have that, and we need to update our logging to show that, more conspicuously at least, that we are pulling from the cache when we see those entries in the Ratify log.
Yeah. So as I think Eric was going through the inner details a little bit last week. So we don't have any cache today if the executor with cache is not on the code path. So sorry, the steps are like getting the referrers, and then we have a cache for the artifact, like given a digest of like a signature, we cache that artifact, but we don't cache the result of the verification. So yes, if Gatekeeper is calling us every 60 seconds, then we are doing some validation every 60 seconds, is my understanding.
I'm not 100%. I'm not against that validation. My concern is morely network calls. at this point. I mean, I think if we're going to cache, we need to figure out what we're going to cache. In so much as if we can decide that there's a certain age that we're comfortable with, where there was a validation done and it was fine, it was, the image signature was verified, then we could decide that we're okay with that age, whatever it's, 30 or 60 seconds, whatever we decide. And that should be configurable as well. And then going forward though, that would allow it to be changed if need be, I guess.
Yes. Oh, so maybe there's two items then. The first one is we want to understand. So yes, we're caching the artifacts, but I think Akash was saying that there are some of the network calls is not cached. So we'll go track down what are the uncached network calls and then cache the verifier decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a little confused as to when you say network calls, is that internal or external to the cluster? I mean, because my concern would be the ones external to the cluster.
Yeah, I think it's, go ahead, Sajay.
I think we're on the same page, which is we don't want the Ratify to basically exhaust in network requests or acquiring artifacts from the registry as well. I mean, given my team actually does own ACR, we definitely don't want to have the registry pounded with more requests than needs to happen per image, right? So it makes sense to maybe prioritize the cache work right now. It is definitely part of the work items that we wanted to do. And I think post dynamic validation, or at least file reload, we should be able to take and validate that maybe configuration changes should not invalidate the entire cache through a pod restart and things like that. So that will also help. Long story short, I think let's make sure we have a work item to ensure that the cache is used, because according to Teja's comment in the chat, we're not using the cache validator right now. And it might just be memory cached. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I agree with that as well. I mean, I don't want to go back to AWS ECR folks and tell them that we're going to pound their endpoints as well. That probably wouldn't go over well.
Yeah, sounds good. I will capture these details in this issue. Any other additional comment? Okay. Hello, Lee. Good to see you again.
Hello, sorry I joined late. I don't know if these dots have been connected yet, but just for introductions, Alessandro is another member of the team that myself and Kara and Yomi are on.
Nice.
He reminded me that this was happening. We're all still sort of recovering from an org hack week, so I lost track of it. But I'm mostly here to listen right now. We're, I think, still putting some things together after being out of commission all last week.
Cool. Yeah, we don't have a very long agenda today. We talked about the caching that was brought up last week. And we talked a little bit before you left about the new issues you created. And I think at some point we should go through the list and see which one have priority. So we have 30 minutes right now. Do you want to go through the list? Are you ready today, or?
If you can forgive me being possibly a little bit scattered, we can absolutely go through those. I can talk about sort of where our priorities are. Yeah, if you pull them up, I'm happy to comment on them. I think some of them were definitely looking for further feedback from y'all, especially like service-to-service communication. I'd want more feedback from y'all about if you have a preference between something like gRPC or HTTPS or some other option. And then as well, things like splitting the Ratify repo or restructuring the executor flow, which is issues 190 and 192. Those are both things that would require probably a fair bit of support from y'all in terms of, you know, the repos would have to actually move around, and we don't have access to that at all. Or like restructuring the executor flow would be a lot of very direct changes in the middle of Ratify, as opposed to like making another validator or verifier, which is a little easier to sort of keep off to the side. But if you open the if you opened 196, I think that has a pretty good summary of the Kubernetes environment function issues that I opened. And it links out to either the ones that I opened or already existing issues that made sense in the context. So I don't know if anyone had comments or questions, but I'm happy to answer or talk more in response to those. Off the top of my head, I don't have a bunch of immediate stuff to say. So if anyone else has thoughts on any of this.
So splitting the repos, I think we can get Lucky's help to create more repositories, and if we kind of like give an outline as to what the various places would be, then I think that's doable. It's not we can do that as needed. I don't have any concerns on that. But besides that, I don't think we have gone through much in detail. Do you want to pick on anything that is like critical besides the repository splitting?
Do you mean critical to sort of get started on this work, or
Right.
critical to support this in general? Because I think to get started, the main thing that has to happen is or it doesn't have to happen. It's still optional to split the repos out, but it would be super useful to have that as a starting point where there's like a library repo, a CLI repo, so we're not like messing up CLI code in trying to make it work better as a server. The screen is, oh, the screen's back for me. Okay, I was about to say I'm looking at that right now. So I think the 4 in the primary goals, honestly, this is a pretty clear summary of what's needed. The biggest ones are going to be like supporting CRDs in a Kubernetes environment. It's not necessary for function in Kubernetes, but the current config.json setup is really, really hard for people to extend if they implement their own verifiers.
Makes sense.
So that and the service-to-service communication is probably a priority. And then under primary goals, there are 3 and 4 around dynamic configuration and use namespaces as a logical separator. I think those sort of flow naturally from wanting to support CRDs. And number 4, I think, also can potentially open y'all up to more like multi-tenant or multi-configuration scenarios where you can support multiple rule sets based on some variable, which in Kubernetes would probably be the namespace.
Okay.
And then I think the other big one sort of from your side is that support policy execution using OPA. I know you were discussing that a few weeks ago in the meeting, but that's definitely, if we want to see Ratify work well, both in like a Kubernetes environment as something called by Gatekeeper and in other environments as something that isn't going to be called by Gatekeeper, but is still expected to do policy execution, I feel like bringing in that OPA frameworks is going to be a natural step to support that really well.
I'm interested to learn more about restructure executor flow to allow verifier and store to be more loosely coupled. What does that mean?
Sure. When we were looking into Ratify and looking at how to make things more easily extensible, we were noticing that the verifiers at times are even directly talking to the stores. The verifiers are passed a copy of the executor, well, not a copy, but a reference to the executor, a reference to the relevant referrer store. And we think it would largely help make all the components a little more distinct and able to stand on their own or be more reusable. If those are less tightly coupled and there's less direct interaction between those pieces. If you click through to that link, there's a rough sort of flow diagram that I put into that one that covers some other things as well. It was sort of me sketching out, trying to capture what I thought like configuration management would also look like, and that's sort of the blue and yellow sections. But this second half of the diagram with the purple and green on the sides was trying to work through a flow where the verifiers are never talking directly to the stores or vice versa, and therefore they're all a little more pulled apart and a little more easy to potentially reuse. One possible path that y'all might be interested in there, we've recently done some work on the eraser project, and it has some areas where either communication with Ratify or reuse of Ratify's verifiers and stores concepts might really shine. Eraser is supposed to take non-compliant images that are no longer running off of Kubernetes clusters. And that's an area where something like, hey, does this image have vulnerability scans that are critical, or does this image have an SBOM? Might be really good avenues for what non-compliant image looks like. So that's some of our thoughts as to why like making this more reusable and more loosely coupled would be a big win. Did that answer your question?
Kind of, I'm still thinking. So is the concern around verifier calling the store to get more data of what to verify? You want to decouple that verifier is a standalone verifier, and all the information that it requires to verify is passed by the executor? Is that
it was partially the verifier calling the store directly and partially the verifiers needing to be able to handle logic around nested artifacts. It'd be cleaner if the nested artifact logic was handled in the executor and the verifiers are just passed a chunk of content and say, hey, here's all the information we have about this. Do your work on it and then give it back to us with whatever additional information you've figured out. So yeah, the nested artifact was sort of the second half of that. I didn't cover that at first, apologies.
So you see a proposal that the nested artifacts has to be verified by the verifier? Let's take an example of an SBOM which is signed by notary v2. So how do you want to do? I'm just thinking we may not, we don't want to solve that problem, but I'm just thinking aloud here.
So that's exactly a problem that we want to solve. That's one of our customer scenarios actually. The imagined flow for that is that the SBOM verifier, whatever an SBOM verifier looks like, handles the SBOM artifact, and the signature verifier handles the signature. And the SBOM verifier can independently say, this is a valid SBOM. It is, it's in the SPDX JSON format, and it looks good and whatever you want your SBOM verifier to be doing. The signature verifier can say this is a valid signature. It meets, it's signed by this key that you passed us in, so it's all good. And then the executor knows the relationship between those two things. The executor knows that one is a reference to the other, but neither of the verifiers need to know that because the SBOM verifier doesn't know how to handle signatures, and vice versa. The signature verifier wouldn't know what to do with SBOMs. So then if we're thinking about this in a flow where a gatekeeper has sent an external data call into Ratify, the executor could then pass this chunk of data back to gatekeeper that shows that we've got this SBOM and here's some information about like the validity of the SBOM. We've got a signature referring to that SBOM, and here's some information about the validity of the signature. And then in your policy execution, one of your checks could be there needs to be an SBOM, it needs to be signed. You've done all the verification of those facts in the separate verifiers that know their areas of influence, basically. And OPA just needs to be concerned with it exists and it's been checked. Or the policy, the Rego policy, not so much OPA, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I thought that's the model currently we have, because Notary V2 does signature verification. SBOM just does the SBOM verification, but it's just the verifier code path of the executor, which will just delegate all the verification, whether it's nested verification or it's a single verification. It will just hand over to that, which then calls the appropriate plugin to do the verification. Plus, it takes care of the nested verification. I thought it was like that only, but you are saying you wanted to mix that and have everything in the executor.
I would have to. I've been off this for a week, so I would have to go and look at the code to confirm. I know we had some questions around how nested artifacts were handled, but it may be that to some degree this already matches up with the existing Ratify. Off the top of my head, the only one I'm certain of is the verifiers being passed in the executor in the store. That was a pattern that didn't look great to us.
So the one, I think I can give some context on that. The only reason why the store was ever passed around was to kind of like get more related data.
Yeah, I'll paste this. I think I text Susan on the reason as to why we had to initially, if you see the history, commit history, we didn't have that store handle passed to the verifier, but later we found a need of it. Maybe I can paste it over here, whatever I gave to Susan on the Slack. That was one of the reasons. Like we ended up in the scenarios like cosign verifiers, which doesn't follow the reference artifacts format. Similarly, we had to handle vulnerability scan results verification, which does not have it doesn't follow the OCI artifact spec. They have their own database and they have their own way of querying the store. We could not generalize that everybody, every artifact is an OCI artifact. It follows that it will have a reference manifest, it will have a blob and all those things. I think that's where we stumbled, and we thought maybe we should pass the store handle to the verifier, so it knows how to interpret whatever artifact that it has, and it will query for more if required. That was one of the original reasons, but it's, yeah, we are open to make changes if you think.
No, this is exactly the sort of stuff we wanted to hear more about.
Sure.
So
okay. Yeah, we can improve it. Yeah, definitely we can. Yeah, that was one of just the history behind.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Had it like an original model, we had this completely decoupled verifier, and then we came across so many issues, especially when we were integrating cosign and scan result and some other things when we were prototyping, and then we realized maybe we should have that control to verify, to query the store in whatever way or what artifacts it needs. Yeah.
That's really good to know. Thank you. Yeah, we can definitely do some more thinking and talking on that.
This is all very good discussion. Yep.
Yeah, no, the cosign side of things I hadn't considered as strongly, because our focus is pretty heavily on ORS using ACR as an ORS store. But
we went through a couple of rounds of discussion to make sure we could stitch a bunch of these different providers, right? Like, and that was why we ended up with these challenges. And the biggest problem with the store is that if you ever need to get content in any other manner, the store is the only way to access, because it knows how to do the authentication. It knows how to kind of talk to any other endpoint. So if you have to maybe look at a Helm chart or a config blob that maybe the config is not running as root or something weird, that you need the store. So there are a set of scenarios that without having access to the store, you cannot do. But for
that
context,
makes a lot of sense.
We don't want the store there, but any other access can happen only to the store. But maybe there's another pattern, which is you can have a simple verifier that does not take the store, and you have this extended, more advanced patterns that can take the store, so that the baseline 90% use case is with the simple verifier. I think both models are also feasible here.
We can expose both APIs in our
Yeah.
verifier.
Initialization can be simpler for most of the scenarios if you want to keep it that way.
Yeah, but it sounds like there's enough complex scenarios that passing the store into the verifier might still be the case in some of them. That's all really good to know about. Thank you. Given that this issue might not be a good one to move forward with or prioritize, I think the biggest areas where we would like your feedback is probably on the CRDs and on the service-to-service communication then. So I know the support CRDs in a Kubernetes environment, issue 193, that one has some like very rough sample CRDs written out. And I would definitely love a lot of feedback on those, so we can sort of hash out what sort of a spec each of them would look like. I think this covers sort of what I was seeing in config.json in terms of configuration, but I'm sure there's pieces that I'm missing. I haven't looked through like every verifier and every store yet, so.
Yeah, unfortunately, Eric is not on the call because past couple of weeks he's been talking to the policy folks to figure out how we can actually set this in AKS or any other environment.
He mentioned that to us as well, yeah.
Yeah, so he started drafting a document. Maybe there's not too much.
I think he shared that with us. I think I've still got it open actually.
Okay, so
yeah.
I think we should probably like leverage because I think this is the only way you can unblock that as well. So maybe it's all going to unify in terms of efforts. And yeah, I don't have any concerns besides maybe getting feedback from Eric and folks from AKS as well to see if they're okay with this and then take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. If you can, if there's anyone besides Eric who you'd particularly like to see this, if you can point them at it, I would really appreciate that.
Okay.
And in response to chat, you're welcome to use that diagram where it's useful. I would probably avoid putting it in the docs until it's accurate to what Ratify actually does, because it's certainly, it's not something that is like exact accurate to the code as it stands, but rather trying to think through flow if things changed. So. Oh, and especially on this one, I should note, I think the biggest point of discussion might be that there might need to be a third CRD that represents like a key, because it sounded like keys could come in different formats and come from different places. And I don't know if that sounded like that would also be Eric's area. So I can poke him for feedback on that, but that's definitely a point worth thinking about in terms of the CRDs.
Can we maybe reach out to Anisha Surtak because the CSI driver is probably the integration point for all the keys that we are thinking about, so that you can directly link with Secret Store and not pass in certs in any other way, because getting the certs or mounting the certs through CSI might be the model that we want to take forward anyway.
That makes sense. And that's just a volume mount, right?
Right.
Okay, so keys as a CRD probably wouldn't make sense then. I won't worry so much about that. But yeah, I think that's about all I've got to go over off the top of my head right now. If there's any other questions or feedback or anything, I'm happy to talk to them. Otherwise, yeah, have the rest of your time back for anything else in the meeting. Sounds like no questions.
Oh, hello. I finally managed to unmute myself because they keep disappearing every time I hover. Lee, just a quick comment on the CSI. Like, I remember reading, if you need a link, I'll post a link to the CSI driver. They had some documentation of like, if the external key vault cert changes, what's the process to synchronize the keys?
Yeah, a teammate of mine actually did some work on the key rotation and that. So yeah, I'm vaguely familiar.
Oh, okay, cool. So you would know who to reach out if needed.
Yeah, I can definitely find that project and know who to poke for questions.
Cool. And for the service-to-service communication, like previously, Eric mentioned like the concern of performance. So I think would be good to have like numbers to say like how long does it take? Like, is it in
That's really fair.
Range milliseconds?
We can do some experimenting around that, because that's been a question in my mind as well. Is I don't really know what sort of latency you see, like especially within a cluster where it's intended to be a fairly low latency environment. But we can definitely get back to you with more info there, see if we can make it easier to decide.
Yeah, I think a huge win would be debuggability. Like at the moment, it's like with the sub-processes, it's very difficult to debug. So it is actually a good item. And just a quick question. I was just thinking, does Helm have different repositories for CLI? Does all the projects follow this multi-repository structure?
I don't know about Helm off the top of my head, but most of what Helm is the CLI, right? Whereas I think we were, when we were talking about splitting it into the repos, Oras is what we were looking at and relating to, because Oras has the framework, it has its CLI, it has its, well, I think the framework is the Go library. There's Oras Go, there's the CLI. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what else they have, but I know that they were split, and that's what we were looking at as sort of a model there. Because if you want to have sort of a generalized library, but then also specific CLI function.
Yeah, do you know how they manage like this dependency tracking? Like, does their latest CLI only work with their latest framework?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but I can look into that more for next week.
Okay, I just wanted to understand like what sort of overhead will we have if we split repositories? Like, what are the management costs involved?
Yeah, off the top of my head, it didn't look too significant, but I don't want to promise anything there. I can look into this more and bring some stuff back next week. Just for I'm writing this down, but also just for my own reference, can you add comments to the service-to-service issue and the splitting Ratify issue with these questions? So,
yep.
So it's easier to follow up and it's a little more transparent to anyone just reading the repo.
Yep, that's all I had. Yeah, if anyone else have any items to discuss? Okay, thank you for joining, everyone. I will see you. Oh, sorry, one last announcement. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alessandro.
Oh no, that was just saying thanks for having us. Yeah.
Great seeing you. Thanks for inviting Lee. Yeah, I hope to see you more in the future. And my announcement was that I was going to be OOF next week. So I've asked Akash to drive the meeting. Yeah, ping me if there's any issues. But I will be OOF next week. So I'll see you in 2 weeks, because I was going to say I'll see you next week, but that's not true.
Well, enjoy your time off.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good long weekend. Bye.
Bye.